In today's post-pandemic workplace, employees are grappling with unprecedented levels of stress and burnout, exacerbated by the shifting dynamics of hybrid work and the constant pressure to perform. Recent studies indicate that over 70% of employees report feeling burnt out, with younger generations seeking purpose-driven work and better work-life balance. My guest today, Sara Bell, is the owner of Strive to Thrive Coaching, where she aims to bridge the gap between high performance and well-being in the corporate world. Her mission is to empower ambitious professionals to accelerate their career development, optimize their well-being, and lead more balanced and fulfilling lives. With 20 years of corporate leadership experience in the biopharma and life science industries, she has witnessed different workplace dynamics and navigated her own personal health and leadership transformation. I'm eager to talk to her today about the workplace burnout crisis many of us are experiencing and what she recommends to overcome this situation. This is E3, Empower and Engage with Empathy. All right, so welcome, Sara. The first question I have for you today is around some research that's been done at UC Berkeley by Dr. Christina Maslach. She's a professor of psychology there, and she's also a leading expert on workplace burnout. And her research really emphasizes the importance of reframing the basic question from who is burning out at work to why they are burning out. Is there a good match between the worker and the workplace environment which enables the worker to thrive and do well? I mean, you've experienced burnout firsthand in your professional career. Could you talk about what led to your own burnout and how it could have been prevented?
Sure. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited about our conversation, and this is a topic I'm so passionate about. So just thank you for allowing me to share a bit more about my story and what I'm doing with Strive to Thrive.
Sure, welcome.
So this question, it's super interesting because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about since I left my corporate job at the end of March. And I really have been wondering to myself, at what point did I go from this highly engaged, motivated, energetic employee who was so excited about her future to someone that was extremely frustrated, negative, cynical, and disillusioned with their job and wondering, what have I done all these years of work for? And after a lot of reflection, I really believe that a lot of it had to do with the pandemic. So in May of 2019, I took a huge step developmentally and outside of my comfort zone to lead a multiple nine-figure business as the global head of marketing at a large life science company. And this was for a product line that was supporting the biopharmaceutical industry. And although I was a bit apprehensive about the role, and I was experiencing the feeling that many people experience when they're about to take on a big role, right? Fear, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. I was thinking to myself, can I really do this job? Will I be able to deliver on what people are expecting? But at the end of the day, I had this clear vision for the business. I had worked in that business for a few years, and I really had so many ideas. And that was what drove me to take the job. I really felt I could make a real impact, not only to the business, but also to the teams supporting the business, many of which had been my peers. So that was the first challenge, is now being the leader of an organization with a lot of the people that had previously been my peers. But honestly, everything was going so well. In the first 6 months, I established a strong sense of psychological safety and strong sense of team within my organization. I gained a lot of credibility and respect with my business partners, and I developed and received endorsement on a new business strategy, which for me was just a huge sense of accomplishment because it wasn't something I had ever really done on my own before. And I was moving into execution mode when the pandemic hit. Now, the pandemic completely rocked our business. I mean, we took a product line that had been growing 20% year over year, which is a lot in and of itself, and it just skyrocketed even further as companies received government funds to produce COVID vaccines in mass quantities. And frankly, we couldn't keep up with orders. Not only that, but we didn't have processes or systems in place to triage and prioritize orders. And so I was just getting inundated with requests and fire drills and the need to make very critical business decisions from all parts of the organization, while at the same time trying to support my teams through the drastic changes that we were all experiencing with the pandemic, right? We were all being forced to work from home, some of us not by choice. Some that had kids or were caring for aging parents had to figure out how to make that happen. Everyone was concerned, not only with their own health and mental well being, but those of their friends and family around them. And then all of the political and world events that were occurring at the same time. So that was difficult. And then on top of that, having to navigate virtual learning for my two kids, who at the time were in kindergarten and second grade. And that was in and of itself a full time job. And so I really did my best to use all the tools that I had in my arsenal. Thankfully, I had already built a good habit of exercise daily. And so I was doing that. I was waking up, I was exercising, I was walking, I was getting outside in nature, I was trying to journal and connect with my family and go back to books and podcasts on personal development and growth. But honestly, the thoughts just took over. And mentally, I just could never truly shut off or relax. I lost the ability to truly disconnect. And then, right, with no one commuting to the office, meetings started earlier and earlier. Most days I was on the phone by 7 and not getting done until 4 or 5 p.m. with little to no breaks. Meanwhile, I have two kids trying to figure out virtual learning and a husband who also works full time. And so the mom guilt set in pretty intensely because I was just on the phone all day and I couldn't help my kids. That burden was fully on my husband while he was also trying to navigate how to work from home. And not only that, but the meetings were just so dynamic. So I would go from one meeting where I was a critical decision maker to another meeting where I needed to deliver data and information to leadership who needed to make a critical decision, to one-on-ones with my team where I honestly was acting more like a therapist than a manager, which is completely fine and something that I actually enjoy doing. But with everything compounded, I was just so emotionally exhausted and I was at my breaking point. And I think this is very common for high performers is they don't ask for help until it's too late because they don't want to be seen as weak. They don't want to be seen as less capable, and they don't want their ask of help to hinder or hurt their future capabilities, right? Not seen as, someone that can't hack it. And so that's what I did. I just internalized it for so long. And it got to a point where I went to my manager and I said, I can't do this anymore. What are some options? And we came up with the idea of getting me a coach. And I started working with a coach, and over 6 months, it helped immensely. But quite honestly, mentally, I had already made the decision that, a future in corporate America was no longer for me. And so the coaching helped me work through a lot of the mental blocks and irrational fears that I had in my mind that were making me emotionally attached to my work. And so I was able to get through that. But in my case, I had already kind of hatched this exit plan, which in hindsight was a gift because it allowed me to leave my corporate job and do what I'm doing now, which is launching Strive to Thrive coaching. And the reason why I do this, or why I'm doing this, is because I truly believe that if I would have been provided a coach when I started that position was a huge development jump for me. If someone had seen that and invested in me with a coach, I feel like I would have been armed with the right mindset and the right tools and the right strategies to not only get through that challenging time, but to continue to advance into higher leadership roles within the organization. And so that is the mission of Strive to Thrive, to really support high performers and emerging leaders and arm them with what they need before they need it. And a lot of it is mindset and reprogramming work. And it takes time to build those new neural networks, right? And really change behaviors that in some people are programmed into our minds in early childhood, right? This need for external validation and people pleasing and perfectionism. And so if you're being reactive and trying to fix those things after they've already impacted you mentally, it's really hard to change at that point. And so taking a proactive approach is just so much more effective and being armed with those things before you get into stressful situations and higher leadership roles where those skills are critical.
I think this is a really important point you make about being proactive. It actually makes me think of a conversation I had with the mental health counselor I spoke to in our last episode around self-care. She talked about all the things that you did for yourself during the pandemic, Sarah, where you were journaling, you were taking care of your mental health, your physical health, doing your best to really take care of yourself. But you knew deep inside that you had to go externally and find other ways to support yourself because the self-care just wasn't enough. It seems to me that there needs to be proactivity on both sides. So companies themselves, HR departments, team leaders need to step up and invest in these types of coaching programs to proactively offer it to employees as part of a benefits package, for example. But it also seems to be the case where the employee themselves, himself or herself, they need to know how to be proactive about their own health and their own well-being in the workplace. I've read a lot of articles about the younger generations, Gen Z, et cetera, being, having very high anxiety and feeling very isolated. And I'm sure a lot of this is due to the fact that we're all networking and communicating online instead of actually having real relationships and human connections. But how can we help the younger generation feel empowered in the workplace to help themselves and ask for support so they don't get to the point where you got to, where you, by the time you asked for help, you had already basically come up with your exit plan. And I'm seeing this trend too in the workplace. It's fascinating to me because when we were all going through the pandemic, there was this overwhelming sense of empathy and care across the corporate culture. Because I think we all collectively understood that we needed to take care of each other during this time. And it was an unprecedented time for all of us. And we all just were figuring it out on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So you felt like organizations were taking proactive approaches and doing the best that they could, knowing what they did to help people through this time. But now that we're in this post-pandemic world and we're settling back into life as it is now with the pandemic behind us, I'm seeing a lot of burnout from people, especially women in the workplace, who went through that time period with kids coming into the office and trying to do homeschooling and basically doing everything and being everything for everyone and not having the time to take care of themselves. And that just kind of built up over time. And now we're seeing the result of this collective burnout across the workforce. So from your perspective, with the work you do and the wide variety of clients that you encounter through one-on-one coaching and equipping teams with the self-awareness, the mindset, the behaviors, the skills and strategies to accelerate their leadership development and thrive, what do you think is the biggest leadership challenge organizations currently face? And how are you helping individuals and teams address this?
Sure. Well, I'd like to start this answer with one of my favorite quotes of all time, and it's, "You don't build a business, you build people, and they build the business," from Zig Ziglar. And that really, to me, is what it's all about, is investing in our people and our leaders and setting good examples, boundaries, and expectations. I really feel like the biggest challenge is that leaders aren't being developed, coached, and supported as they take on more scope and responsibilities. And as we talked about, like, being proactive is the best approach here. The other part is the right behavior isn't being modeled from the leaders at the top. And that's really to no fault of their own because they themselves weren't ever coached or trained and equipped with these tools and these strategies. And so it really makes it more than just a leadership challenge. It is a cultural challenge. And burnout is contagious and it's spreading like wildfire right now. And the significant is very impactful to businesses. I mean, as we just mentioned, we're seeing talented individuals, particularly women, leaving the workforce at an alarming rate. They're either holding back on taking the next step in their career because they're afraid that they won't be able to handle more stress and more time away from their family and still cope and have a life that they want, the quality of life, or they're seeking entrepreneurial paths or leaving the workforce altogether, thinking they can do this on their own and have more time freedom than they could working for someone else. And according to a Forbes article, HR leaders at this point say employee burnout is responsible for up to half of all annual workforce turnover. So this is a huge problem because we're missing out on very talented people. And those are the same people, high performers are going to be the people that seek alternative routes. They're not going to stay there if they don't see alignment with their values and their future within an organization. And so for those of you listening, I just want you to stop and think about your boss or your boss's boss. What behaviors do they practice? Are they making requests off hours? Are they checking, responding to emails on nights and weekends and vacations? Are they scheduling meetings during non-core business hours? Are they sending you requests or expecting you to work and respond on nights, weekends, and vacations? If your leadership is doing this, how could you possibly think that you could say no or set healthy boundaries and still be successful within that organization? High performers, they have behaviors and tendencies, right? Things like self-motivation and discipline, fast response time, saying yes to everything, perfectionism, working hard and long hours. And many of them even have an emotional attachment to work, right? They derive validation and value from their jobs. Well, these are many of the same behaviors and traits that help people achieve early success as individual contributors, and they get people promoted and rewarded into leadership positions. And so these people build this association, right? These rewards, this recognition, this promotion, this validation is associated with these behaviors. So they say, okay, these are the things I need to do to be successful. But the problem is that these same behaviors aren't sustainable as you move into higher level leadership positions where things like prioritization or delegation, people development, being able to work through others, right? Being able to manage stress in a healthy way and make critical decisions without all of the information, right? And just having the resiliency to carry on when you face a big setback or a failure or a no. These things are what are required for success in higher level leadership positions, yet emerging leaders aren't getting the coaching and the training and the support they need to make that transition from an individual contributor where they use all these unhealthy behaviors to be successful into these leadership positions. And so what they do is they just continue to use the same behaviors that help them be successful initially. And that's what continues to get them rewarded, right? They're seen as dedicated, committed, always available, delivering high quality products. And so they think it's required to do those things to be successful. Literally, there are neurological connections built in their brain that associate those behaviors with success. And so they don't say no, they don't set boundaries. Right. And in many instances, these people's work becomes their whole identity. And it's very difficult to rewire and reprogram those connections once they've already been made to that extent. And so the solution becomes more than just take a break or self-care, right? Go do some yoga, go for a run, just say no, just prioritize better, which are usually the typical solutions you hear. And at that point, like I said, it's more of a mindset and a mental piece that needs to be reprogrammed, right? The individual not only needs to gain self-awareness that they have these associations and neurological networks in their brain that are causing them to behave this way, then they have to clear the mental blocks and fears. They need to rediscover their identity, who they are outside of work, taking work out of the equation, and redefine their definition of success so that they can move past this, right? And then there's the tactical piece. There's the skills, the tools of how to prioritize and plan, right? How to set and communicate effective boundaries, how to manage stress and energy and delegate. And those are all just tactical skill sets that need to be learned. But this is really why I founded Strive to Thrive Coaching. It's really to address this urgent need for personalized support through both group and private one-on-one coaching, mentoring, and training. And the goal is to really bridge the gap between high performance and holistic well-being in the workplace and set a new cultural standard, right? Because if organizations invest in emerging leaders, then that becomes the new leadership standard. And these healthy behaviors around well-being get integrated into the workplace, right? It's part of what everyone is doing and the community around them. And there is that sense of belonging and support that everyone's doing this. And so it is accepted. And so at Strive to Thrive, it's really about empowering leaders to unlock their full potential, accelerate their development, and achieve personal fulfillment so that they can thrive in their career and in their life. And by doing so, that creates a ripple effect within the organization and really drives true cultural change in these areas. If you think about just the investment in people's growth and development, right? How would that feel as an employee? If your company just gives you a coach, makes that investment in you as an employee, how amazing would that feel? Because not only are you able to use those skills for your job and achieve your career ambitions, but you're able to take those skills home and be a better mother, wife, sister, whatever, right? Improve your relationships. Be the best version of yourself inside and outside of work. And to me, that's really powerful. Being able to arm people with what they need before they need it. And really, this is not just an employee problem, it's an organizational problem.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking of a lot of things after I'm hearing you talk about the culture change that's required to bring this to fruition. I know a lot of people are looking into building their business skills through executive MBA programs, for example. And I think way back to I don't have an MBA, but I have a master's degree, and I think way back to that program that I went through, and not one part of that program included how to be a good leader. It's all about business strategy, project management, supply chain. So you get the full gamut of how a business is run, tactically speaking. But my thought is, why aren't we implementing some of the principles that you are applying in your coaching program in these MBA programs? Because most of these students have already been out in the business world and they're looking to go back to school to further enhance their leadership skills. And absolutely, it's important to understand the finances, the strategy, the supply chain, how the commercial side of the business is run. All of that is important if you want to be a good leader. But I think what you're saying here about leadership and people development is even more critical to have that full package of not only having really good business acumen, but also knowing how to empower and engage a team of people. I will say personally, I avoided people leadership for a long time, mainly because I was afraid I wouldn't be the people leader that a team reporting into me would need me to be. So,
Then,
yeah.
did you have good leadership role models? Do you think that is associated with why you felt that way, that you didn't have a good role model as a leader and that's why you didn't feel like you could do that?
Yes and no, but I've had my fair share of really bad bosses and really good ones.
Yeah.
So in fact, the last 7 years of my career, my manager was by far the best people developer That was her passion. Every day she came to work wanting to develop and empower her team. So that was an exceptional experience that I had in the last 7 years. And she was actually the one who empowered me to eventually become a people leader myself. So that was helpful.
Yeah.
But I think what kept me from going down that path for such a long period of time was a self-confidence thing. I think you see this a lot in women. Um, oh, I'm not sure I'm capable of doing this. I have all these other responsibilities at home. Can I juggle this? So we end up questioning ourselves as women.
Yeah.
And then we just don't do it. We just don't believe in ourselves. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very true. And I think the women that do become trailblazers and move into, executive C-suite positions, it's a daily practice for them to overcome those feelings of self-doubt and fear. And I think the biggest challenge right now is we've worked really hard to get where we are from a gender equality perspective, and even outside of gender, just diversity in general in leadership. And I think some of what's happening with this burnout crisis is diluting some of the progress we've made. And so, unfortunately, if you're a young woman entering an organization and you look at the executive leadership team and it's all men, then how can you possibly believe that you can be there, right? And you start to think, well, why aren't more women there? Is it because it's too much and they can't manage work with their family, right? And so we need to create a vision in organizations and a culture in organizations where women not only are in those positions, but they're thriving and they're showing other women, right, how to do this, how to be able to balance a family and do that without, feeling like you're making huge sacrifices to your family, and be able to lead organizations, right? Because there's so much talent out there that's not being capitalized on by organizations because these women hold themselves back because, one, they don't believe in themselves, and two, they don't believe that they can have both successfully.
I fully agree with that. And I'm wondering, have you actually witnessed examples of individuals or companies who are successfully helping their employees thrive in the workplace, especially female leaders who are visibly demonstrating their ability to thrive and not having to sacrifice to be where they are in their senior leadership role?
Sure. I mean, I guess we'll just start by first sharing that I think a lot of companies are taking action in the area of employee wellness and well-being, and companies are investing loads of money in different programs and technology. But unfortunately, I think a lot of that is really just a check the box activity. And without the day-to-day practice, implementation, support, and accountability, it's just another thing on everyone's growing to-do list, right? And so until there are other women in the organization helping, mentoring, coaching, showing and role modeling the behavior that I'm here, I'm thriving, I'm leading, I'm fulfilling my career ambitions, and I'm a mom, or I'm, in addition, caring for my aging parents, or whatever, everyone's unique situation may be, it is possible to have a big career and a life outside of work and not having to be sacrificing your quality of life. And, in terms of what organizations are doing today, right, it's a lot of apps, right? You see things like Sonic Boom, Vitality, Virgin Pulse, these companies being built to support corporate wellness through on-demand courses and meditations and workout programs. And these are all great resources, right? Employee assistance programs. But again, if leaders aren't role modeling the use of these programs and there's no working time allocated to use them, then really what's the point? Because then you're relying on an individual to take the action themselves to do this when they're already overworked and overwhelmed. And we all have the ability to eat better, to exercise, to meditate. Having an app, yes, does that make the access easier? But nowadays you can get so many, things right from the internet. It's not that the information isn't available to people. It's that they don't have the support and the accountability and the community built around them. I mean, you think of how many hours a day you're spending in your job. That's a huge part of your support and community. And if those people aren't around you, aren't embracing these behaviors, then what is motivating you to take action there? And when I was thinking about this, what came to mind was the 70-20-10 learning model, right? This idea that 70% of your learning happens through on the job experience, 20% happens socially through colleagues and friends, and only 10% actually happens through formal training or taking courses. So how can we possibly expect employees to learn and implement new patterns and behaviors when up to 90% of the learning model is missing? There's no day-to-day support, encouragement, and accountability and celebration, which is a huge part of this, right? Reinforcing these good behaviors. It's not happening in the workplace. I shouldn't say not happening, but rarely happening. And in the places it is happening, it's on that leader. That leader has done the work. They've done their own personal growth and development. They've sought their own training to be the best version of themselves so that they can lead in the most powerful way possible. Like your example of your manager for the last 7 years. What does success look like? And I'm reading this book right now, A Cure for a Common Company. And so I took this quote from this book, and this is Dr. Richard Safir. He's the Chief Medical Director of Employee Health and Wellbeing at Johns Hopkins Medicine. And he says, well-being is more than a program, prize, or portal. Well-being requires the compilation of an intentionally crafted well-being culture, whereby every member of the organization plays a role not only in their own well-being, but also a role in supporting those with whom they work. It's about fostering human-centered leaders, right? Instead of making engagement and wellness initiatives separate from the job and the work, it needs to be fully integrated, right? Clear work boundaries, leaders doing it versus just champion it or talking about it. We need to be having discussions during one-on-ones and incorporating well-being and wellness and supporting our team members and holding them accountable to the vision they hold for themselves, practicing it daily in team meetings, having team challenges where it feels like it is part of the culture and the community in which they work. I mean, thinking about this, I was thinking, how powerful would it have been for me as a leader at a company to watch an executive stand up on stage in front of the entire company, maybe during an all-company meeting or a town hall, and just take a few deep breaths to calm his stress response before starting to speak. Or an executive leader, right, declining a meeting because it's during his lunch break or his daily run, or hosting a walking or standing meeting, or having a leader step up and say they're going to push out a deadline because the request was too short notice and it's a Friday afternoon. I mean, these are just such small, simple steps that people can do to demonstrate to younger and emerging leaders that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to prioritize yourself first when you need it. And that's what I mean by integrating it into the work.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about a book I'm reading as well, where the author talks about visiting the neonatal intensive care unit, and these workers are under tremendous stress daily. They often have newborns who die on a weekly basis. They experience a death of a child. And what he was finding was many of these workers were finding ways to overcome their stress and trauma by, going to happy hour after work or something, basically turning to alcohol or something like that, which is, a lot of people tend to do that. That's why we have pubs. But they had implemented a therapy helpline for those workers. And initially, I mean, and you see this at work too. I know the company I used to work for, a therapy helpline was available, but it's often situated in the fine print of the wellness package. No one hardly knows about it. And if you do know about it, does anyone even use it? I don't know. Leaders aren't talking about it. It's just there as a box to check, as you said.
Yeah. Well, and I also think sometimes employees feel, especially if these services are being offered by their organization, there's sometimes the stigma that if I seek those resources, my company will find out and that are, my future opportunities too. So I do think that sometimes that prevents people from using those resources, even if they need them.
That's a really good point, because what happened was when they implemented that helpline for the workers, the doctors and nurses in the NICU, no one really used it initially. Maybe for the same fear, like, oh, is this truly anonymous? How, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing this. But then, as some of the senior doctors and nurses started to use it and talk about it in their team meetings, because they would always have a weekly debrief, then the uptick in usage just skyrocketed. So I think this speaks a lot to what you were saying about leaders just showing that they're practicing these methods visibly in town halls or in meetings or whatever, that they're living it themselves. And then that just encourages other people to do the same.
Yeah, and it's all of these things are good. They're proven, backed by science as tools and techniques to help your body move into a relaxed state from a stress response state. And there's so much data and science that shows that having cortisol and being in fight or flight constantly does so much damage to our health. It impacts digestion, it impacts our heart rate, it impacts our blood flow, it impacts everything, right? And so having leaders role model this behavior, I mean, there's no harm that can be done. And the only way for these things to work is to try and do them proactively, because if you're reactive, again, there's a lot of mental blockers and irrational fears that need to be worked through before you can start really solving the problem. So the earlier we're introducing these tools, these techniques, giving employees this support and accountability, the better equipped they're going to be as they advance and take on more scope and responsibilities, right? And so arming them is just so critical. And that's where it gets embedded into just, this is what we do as leaders of our organization, and this is our organizational culture. And if you think about it, right, positivity is just as contagious as burnout. And what would you rather spread, positivity or burnout? Right. And this is a choice as leaders we can all make every day. I mean, my definition of leadership is being the best version of yourself so that you can bring out the best in everyone around you. Because as a leader, it's a huge responsibility. Everyone feeds off of your energy, your mood, your response. If you aren't taking care of yourself as a leader, how can you possibly show up in the right state of mind for those around you? And so it's first taking care of ourselves, really self-reflecting and understanding where maybe you need to do a little bit more work, and where you may have gaps in some of these tools and techniques, or what are some of these mental blockers that you have that you need to overcome. Because if you as a leader feel like you can't prioritize and set effective boundaries because you have this fear that if you do that, your reputation or your success will be hurt, how can you possibly lead a team of people to have a different belief than that? And so it just cascades within the organization. And that's why, you need to start at the top, but also start at the bottom, right? And at some point, these things will converge, right? So every new leader coming into your organization that is showing signs of wanting to advance their career or showing signs of high performance, we should be investing in them with a coach early on, and then working really hard with executive leadership to make sure that they also have coaches. Now, the objectives of those two different leaders may be different, but the foundational elements of coaching really are very much the same.
Absolutely. And I think my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation with you, Sarah, is that companies are not run by robots; they're run by humans.
Right.
And so easy to infiltrate humanity into organizations. It doesn't cost anything. it doesn't require much effort at all, in fact, and a little bit goes a long way. And I think if we're all able to step up as leaders and be okay with not being okay, being vulnerable in front of our teams, and showing compassion for others and their vulnerable state as well, we can all work together to be better business leaders in the corporate world. So I think what you're saying is there's a lot of work to be done, but there is hope. And I'm optimistic about the future, knowing that there's people like you out there proactively helping companies create a better organizational culture so that we can all come to work every day excited about what we're doing and energized by our state of well-being. So thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, this is Sara Bell with Strive to Thrive Coaching. I encourage you to reach out to her. She has a website as well. If this topic interested you, she certainly has a lot to offer.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.